Hi, my name is Kim Mutcherson, co-dean of Rutgers Law School in Camden, and this is The Power of Attorney. So today is another great episode where I get to talk to some of our current Rutgers Law students, both of whom I'm very excited to have here to chat with me today. And I am actually going to let you two introduce yourselves. So Destiney, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Destiney Wilson, and I am a 3L here at the Rutgers Law School in Camden.
Awesome. Thank you, Destiney. And then Tue, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Tue Ho. I am a 2L here at Rutgers Law School in Camden. And this is my first time on a podcast, so it's very exciting.
Well, it's great to have you. So the way I love to start these conversations is to get a sense from people of, what their origin story is. So what is it, all of these options that you could have had in the world of what you wanted to do with yourself, and you decided to come to law school. So what was it that drew you to law school? And then we'll talk a little bit about Rutgers Law, but what drew you to the law originally? Destiney, you want to start us off?
Sure, I'll start us. This is a really funny explanation because I've always kind of known I was going to be a lawyer, but I don't know, I can't pinpoint in my life where I made a definitive decision to go to law school. There are some things that happen in my life, particularly personal things that have also motivated my desire to come to law school. But I guess the short answer is that I just always knew that I was going to be an attorney.
Now you're going to force me to go into professor mode. So I wanted to push a little bit. What is it that looked appealing about being a lawyer? What did you imagine doing with the law degree that made it something that you wanted to pursue?
I think the most appealing part of being an attorney is really just fighting on behalf of people who need help. Mm-hmm. Would be the most appealing part, the fire that I feel in my stomach where I see injustice in the world. I'm sure everyone else here feels that same burn, and just the desire to be able to speak up for others.
Absolutely. Tue, what about you? Why law and why law school?
Yeah, a lot of things that Destiny just said really resonate, especially that little story about how when she was younger, she always thought she was going to be a lawyer somehow. I also, when I was younger, when people asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I used to say, yeah, I'll be a lawyer. But I didn't really know what lawyers did. I just thought it was something that people said. But no, it didn't really come across me as a potential career path until recently, like three years ago. I was a special education teacher in Kensington, Philadelphia, before I came to law school. I was teaching in the classroom for 4 years. And it was in the classroom that I was exposed to so many systematic inequalities that all impact education that are not have anything to do with education itself. It's not about the curriculum, the teacher training. There are other things that impact student academics. Things like housing and health and food. These are all based on historical and current systematic injustices. And it was being exposed to that in the classroom that really, Destiny said, burned that fire more and more. And I started going around to different community organizations and learning about the different advocacy they did. And then I got impatient. Organizing people power is supposedly what we're supposed to do, but it's just taking so long. And I guess out of impatience, I took the LSAT because I thought, being a lawyer and advocating in the courtroom would be somewhat faster. And somehow I'm learning that it's just as slow in the legal arena, but at least I have other tools to play with.
Yeah. I want to back you up just a little bit for folks who aren't necessarily from this, geographic area. Can you tell people what the Kensington neighborhood is like in Philadelphia?
Sure. So Kensington, Philadelphia is in the northeast section of Philadelphia. Demographics are mostly recently a big influx of Puerto Rican Americans and Colombian Americans and other South Americans have been moving into the neighborhood. At our school, for example, over 98% of our students, they qualify for reduced period because they were under a certain income level.
Right.
And also the neighborhood, it's in the news recently for having a lot of drugs, the opioid epidemic is in Philadelphia. Around our neighborhood, we would see a lot of folks who were sick and a lot of exposure to that kind of environment.
So, both of you came to law school as social justice scholars. Destiny, can you just describe really quickly what it means to be a social justice scholar here on the Camden campus of Rutgers Law School?
Sure. So the best way I can explain it is that the social justice scholars well, first you get a scholarship for being a part of it. So that's like one thing that's really good about it. But other than that, it basically puts you into this network of students who are dedicated to social justice. It gives you opportunities to help out in the community, to volunteer at different events, to network with maybe people that you wouldn't run into otherwise. And it's like a little community of students who are basically just dedicated to the same thing. There's also some mentoring involved. We get a lot of help with like our resumes and job interviews. So there's like resources and friendships and just different things that you gain from being a part of that group.
Awesome. So you're in your third year, which means that you've had a couple of summers while you've been in law school. And for folks who haven't been law students, summers are when you get the opportunity to actually try to use those skills. Well, one of the chances you get to use the skills that you're learning in law school. So, how have you spent your summers, Destiny?
My first summer, which is the summer after my 1L year, I was an intern at the Office of the Law Guardian in Ewing, New Jersey. And basically, there I was able to help out like the appellate team who's working on issues that concern the lives of children who were in the foster care system. So I got to help attorneys with research. I got to help them put together template memos and briefs and just different things like that. I got to meet a lot of good attorneys. I also got to sit in on custody hearings.
Mm,
I got to observe a couple trials. I also got to go on like a trip with one of the investigators who was doing a home visit, and I got to witness like how she was able to like communicate with one of the children. So it was a really good summer because that would be like my ultimate goal to help children in some way.
mm-hmm.
For my second summer, which is the summer after my 2L year, this summer I was interning with the Philadelphia Defenders Association, and it was completely remote due to COVID-19.
Right.
And strangely enough, I really enjoyed my internship with them. Basically, what I was doing was I was given like a spreadsheet of clients, and I was made to call them and interview them over the phone. And I really liked that because I was able to connect with the clients and talk to them and hear like their stories and the things that were going on with their case. And I felt like I met a lot of really good people over the phone that just found themselves in like bad situations. So
Yeah.
basically, that's all I was doing this summer was just remote interviewing. I also got to meet some of the other interns from different schools like Penn and Temple, and it was a really good experience.
Awesome. And do you see yourself, and I promise I'm going to get back to you, Tue. So you said that you're interested in doing work with children. And so do you sort of see yourself, and this is sort of a pressure question, I get that, but do you sort of see yourself working like in a government agency or in a nonprofit, or are you still kind of trying to figure out where you want to use your skills and where you feel like you'll have the most impact?
Ideally, I would like to be a juvenile defender
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like I could do the most good in that space, and really talk to my clients while they still have like a chance to like turn their life around.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would feel like I would want to go like the government route, but I'm open to all aspects where I can really help and impact the lives of children.
Awesome. So Tue, what about you? What were you able to do this summer?
My 1L summer, I had the fortune of working and interning remotely while I was at the ACLU of Pennsylvania, and I had
Oh,
the
nice.
distinguished honor of being their first ever remote intern, as they said, because I started like a week before everyone else, and it was a great experience, especially this summer, this summer full of COVID and police protests and whatnot. There were a lot of
Yeah.
things we were working on at the ACLU PA that I got to be like in the front row.
What was the most interesting issue that you got to work on this summer?
I'm not so sure I'm allowed to say yet.
Ooh, okay, fine.
But I mean, some other issues like some, COVID conditions in detention centers.
Sure.
Um, Researching what constitutes as probable cause for an ICE detainer.
Hmm.
That was some of the work I was doing. I mean, with the police protest, there was a lot of like client intake,
Hmm.
and just being on the wall, listening to the attorneys at the ACLU like discuss like strategy. And
Yeah.
like that was really really valuable.
So one of the things that I think is really fascinating is, sometimes I'll talk to students who are here for Admitted Students Day, or who are very early on in their law career, and they have a very vague sense of what they want to do, but they also have a very vague sense of what it is that lawyers do. And I'm curious from both of you whether, now that you've had a chance, you've got some law school under your belt, and you've also had the chance to work at some agencies with lawyers and who are doing legal work. Are there some things about the actual practice of law that are different from what you imagined they would be?
I definitely would say, since being in law school, my perspective on like what a lawyer actually does is a lot different from before I came to law school. So before I came to law school, I thought lawyers were the people that we see on TV, the people that are constantly litigating and power struggling on TV and going back and forth, like that very like adversarial persona that they have on TV. But since I've come to law school, I've realized that lawyers do a lot of different things. I've been around attorneys who literally sit at their desk all day and they type and they answer phone calls, and that's it. I know there are some lawyers that basically work on just policies. And then of course, you have the lawyers that do go to court and they're in court all day, every day, and they're barely at a desk or they're barely writing. And then you have lawyers that do some of both.
What about you, Tue? Are there ways in which, now that you've had a chance to see some of this in action, that you think about lawyering differently and what we do as lawyers?
Yeah, in my very limited experience and exposure so far, I'm pleasantly surprised to see how like collaborative the work is. Like at the ACLU every case they took, there was a Zoom call to discuss strategy and to practice it. It just really, I could see the skills and the practice I was doing at school translate into that work too, because it is very collaborative. And I had thought previously that lawyers just bunker down in an office, just research by themselves all night. But no, like the work is extremely collaborative.
And I think one of the things I've also had experience in the past working at sort of large public interest organizations that are doing impact litigation, the kinds of things that the ACLU does. And, I don't think that people always realize how incredibly strategic the work is. Sort of figuring out, all right, what are the cases we're going to take? Who are the plaintiffs that we're going to work with? What are the issues that we're going to pursue? And how are we going to pursue them? As you say, Tue, there's a lot of conversation and collaboration and strategizing that goes on before these cases wind their way through the courts. So I want to shift gears and talk about being a law student in a world that is very different from the world in which you both initially started law school. So obviously COVID has been a huge impact on our nation and on the world. We have a level of division within our political sphere that I haven't seen for quite some time. And then we also have these incredibly difficult and highly necessary conversations that are going on about the continued salience of race and racism in this country. So I want to get into talking about some of those issues. What have the last few months been like for the two of you, being away from campus, but then also having so many things going on in the world that you have to contend with?
I think the first word is like it's been hard. It's been hard in multiple ways. First off, like with the nation's climate and the conversations, like the exposure of like racial injustice for some in the world has been like motivating for me, but also has been like conflicting because as a law student, as an intern, like I was, and as a law student now, like I'm very busy with like my school responsibilities. So like I'm finding a difficult balance to like get back into like my like how to balance my organizing and like my protests and like like strategies and like what direct actions I can do as now a law student. And like I feel like there's like limited options in like in some of that work that I used to do. So that's been kind of like a balancing act and an intense one. And then with like just law school, remote instruction, there have been pros, like our access to the Newark campus and classes have been, I think, great. I'm taking a few classes from the Newark campus, and like just that expanded those expanded options have been really interesting and insightful for me. But like remote instruction stuff, and I get Zoom fatigue easily. It's harder to like collaborate with your peers in some aspects. In some ways, it's easier to collaborate with your peers because you have the time to just do a quick Zoom. But like I don't know, like the Zoom, things go missing in translation when you're on Zoom, right? Like it's not as energizing to be in company with people as it is with in person.
Destiney, what about you? What has this moment been like for you?
Well, like I'll start with the COVID aspect. I think it's been a little hard just having to go to school from home and everything. Of course, I think especially for like the incoming 1Ls, I feel like it might be harder for them to, I guess, like form a sense of community since you're not really seeing or interacting with anybody physically. I was talking to Tue before we started, and I was just telling him like how I have to really like stay on top of myself, making sure that I'm getting up at 7, like going out for a walk or whatever, and just making sure that I keep on top of my schedule because being at home, it's easy to slip into like procrastination or just laziness, or it's easy to feel like disconnected from school since we're not really like in school. When COVID first started, I got really sick like at the ending of last semester. So I had like high anxiety about that because I didn't really know what to think about COVID. When information about it first started coming out, I didn't know like if I was gonna like die or anything. So luckily I didn't have it though. It was something else. But just like worrying about your health and not being around too many people. And I think like the third thing too is that sometimes it could be like a little lonely. I live alone and it really just forces you to just be with yourself. But it also like provides some time too, I guess, for like just looking inward and you learning new things about yourself because you're forced to, I guess, just slow down. As far as like the racial justice and everything going on, of course that's been frustrating. I'm a Black person, and I feel like it's just it's frustrating and it's tiring because it's like we have these conversations over and over again, and it just seems like nothing is changing, especially since we've seen like what happened with Breonna Taylor and everything. And I know it's just very frustrating. And then you see people, even people that you go to school with, that may or that may not agree, and it's just like, how can we not agree on an issue like racism?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just frustrating. Like I literally have no words.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I hear everything that both of you said. I mean, it's been such a just a difficult period of time to live through and trying to make sense of, what it means to live in a pandemic and walking through the world in a mask and not being able to interact with people in the ways that we're used to. And then also having so much going on in the world that makes you want to have community and want to be around people and want to get that comfort sometimes just from being in a physical space with somebody else, and we've lost that because of the pandemic. And so that's really rough. So I feel your pain on that one. And the other thing that I think, and Destiney, you brought up Breonna Taylor. One of the other things that I think that we often think about as lawyers and as law students, and particularly for folks like you who are interested in social justice and potentially going into public interest law, is the limits of the law, right? Or the ways in which the law, fails to move the world forward in ways that we would like to see. And I would love to talk about that with the two of you a little bit. You're still in law school, and so still having these sort of classroom conversations. And I want to sort of think about how those classroom conversations clash sometimes with what we see actually out in the world, like something like no indictments of consequence coming down in the Breonna Taylor case. How do you, when you sit there and you see things like that, how does it make you feel as someone who's earning a law degree?
That's a great question, and so encompassing of my experience in law school so far. It makes me feel sometimes angry, sometimes scared, sometimes hopeful because things I think have gotten better. And the difference between 1L's conversation and 2L conversations, I mean, like conversations that were happening in the classroom during 1L to conversations that are happening now have been like vast. Like there's a lot more nuance and intentionality in the conversations that professors are leading, guiding, facilitating. But in terms of like hearing like the misinformation and the bias, and sometimes even the straight ignorance and like refusal to see the other, like to see what's happening, has been really frustrating. And so it's been difficult because coming from a space in education, in public education, I was very used to having these conversations with my peers, and then switching over to 1L year, I felt like folks who were thinking through that lens and seeing through that lens were in the minority. And if they weren't in the minority, people just weren't talking about it openly. And it was frustrating because like, how can you talk about the law without the larger social context, right? People just wanted to talk about black letter law in class, and like we get frustrated at students who were trying to bring in the context, and like it was difficult. Like I remember in my criminal law class when issues of race and inequality came up, like some of our white students would like walk out the room, and that was hurtful for me to see, right? Like because we're trying to have like civil discourse here, and like people are just checking out.
Mm.
And I think this year there has been, because of the summer of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and because of Zoom instruction, people are forced to stay in the room at least and have these conversations. And then they're better facilitated this year too. So that's been like really like hopeful and exciting. But there's still a lot more work that can be done to be done.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that you feel like the conversations are being had more and that they're being facilitated better. But I also hear you about the frustration of, some folks, whether it's because of race privilege or, just how their life has been configured, feel like these aren't issues that they have to grapple with, and they're not things that they have to deal with on a daily basis. And so how do you, I think the challenge often for faculty is how do you bridge those kinds of differences in a classroom,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly when you don't necessarily have students, you might have them for 50 minutes or for 75 minutes, and how do you get that really really hard work done? So yeah, we definitely still have work to do, no doubt. Destiney, what about you? What's your, how has this whole law school thing been during this particular environment in the world?
Well, again, just to echo everything that Tue has said, it's just been frustrating, and honestly, a little bit scary too, because with everything going on, you have Breonna Taylor and you have Ahmaud Arbery, just to name a couple of examples. In light of like all of this that's been happening, we also have a president who basically like encourages racial divide. So I feel like a lot of it too is coming from that place as well, because now people feel empowered to be racist, and it almost makes me feel like a little afraid, because it kind of makes me question like, well, where is my place in all of this, especially if Trump is to get elected for another 4 years. Like, where is the safety for Black people in America, Black people, Muslim people, minority people in general? So it's just provoked a lot of thinking. So yeah, that's the short answer, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're on the edge of the presidential election. And this is certainly, from my perspective, I mean, just the wackiest election cycle, but just an incredible lead up to this election, and really, as you were sort of suggesting, Destiney and Tue, really difficult questions about who we are as a country, who we want to be as a country. So trying to be a little bit hopeful. Do you think that there are good and powerful things that are coming out of this moment? You heard a lot of people over the summer saying this feels different, right? This moment in time feels different than other times when we've been talking really explicitly about race. So does it feel different to you? And if so, what are you hoping, at least, or hoping or thinking might come out of this moment?
I think like one of the most encouraging things for me that I've seen has been people really coming together, not just Black people, but at all people, and people really becoming very radical about racial injustice. And that's very encouraging, because it's not like we have to like get white folks on board. There's a lot of white folks that are already on board. So it makes me hopeful that things will change, and that with everyone coming together, there are more of us that think alike than those of us that don't. And I think that if the majority of us really believe in racial justice, we stand a chance to really overturn all of this.
Toy, one of the things that you referenced was this idea of, people being able to, check out of the conversation or not participate in these conversations. And then Destiny was sort of talking about the idea that there are so many people now across, the racial spectrum who are really challenging themselves to be better and to do better. And I would love to hear you talk about how you think law schools fit in to this conversation. What are some of the things that you think we are doing or things that we should be doing that lead us to a future that's a brighter future, right? A future where people understand, white privilege and racism and all these other sorts of things, and we can actually sort of imagine better things to come. That's a hard question. I recognize that, but I'm really curious to hear from you as a student
Yeah,
what you want to see us doing.
yeah, I really appreciate that question too, because I think these questions, these conversations, these questions, these ideas need to be happening in law schools across the country. I'm sure they are to a certain extent, but like just tying in this question and the last question, like one of the things I'm really hopeful about is like it's not an option anymore to have these questions, right? To have these conversations in school. As much as Trump wants to like put out misinformation about like critical race theory and whatnot, like his branding efforts, they are troublesome and a little worrisome. The nuance that people are having towards like those like attacks now are really helpful, because critical race theory, the law is so important, because how systematic racism works is through laws and policy. And as future lawyers, they're not the language isn't going to be explicit, right? As future lawyers, we have to understand how the law, how the written law, and how it's been carried out is embedded to allow disparate impact along racial lines, right? And law students need the training to see that, because we're gonna go out in the world, we're gonna be in positions of influence, right? Public or private, and that leads us to either being complicit, like the existing racist system, or finding ways to collaborate and unpack and unbuild it, right? And put in like protections and whatnot. And what's also super, super exciting is that like, the whole idea of like reform and all the different facets of society, like it's not new. Like we've talked about like police reform for like hundreds of years.
Right.
But what's exciting about like the moment now, and at the same time education reform, is that there's like nuance in analyzing the effectiveness of reforms, and then this like ego push to like more creative solutions, community-driven solutions. And I'm excited about law students and future lawyers being a part of that conversation, hearing from community members who are the most impacted for their solutions.
Absolutely. One of the things that I was really struck by over the summer was the amount of press, like mainstream press, that ideas like, prison abolition and defunding the police, which were, not things that were necessarily talked about in larger circles, right? Although there were definitely activist circles and educational and scholarly circles that were having those conversations. But, to have all walks of people talking about, and which is not to say that there will be defunding of the police, and which is not to say, that all this criminal justice reform will go through, but at least people are talking about it and it's forcing them to think about the world in a different way, which I think is really powerful. Destiny, I wanted to go back to you because you talked before about doing work with juveniles and doing work with folks who are in the foster care system. And, one of the things that has been very clear over the years is we've watched this school to prison pipeline, where we see lots of kids of color, particularly Black kids, who are sort of policed in their schools and then ultimately end up policed in their communities and then end up in prison. So, what does this, as somebody who's interested in criminal justice and potentially spending a career working with folks in the criminal justice system, what role do you hope that you can play within that system, which has been a pretty entrenched system for a very long time and has been really hard to dismantle? When you look at your future, how do you see yourself being able to fix some of these structures, particularly if you're inside of them as opposed to outside of them?
Wow, that's a really good question. And that's something that I have thought about before. I know me as one person, of course, I'm me by myself. I cannot overturn or change the system. And, sometimes it's even assumed that if you work within the system will change you before you change it. So the only thing that I can hope to do as a juvenile defender is just to be a source of love and support for my clients. And I know that I'll have many clients and I can't be all of everything to each and every one of them. But what I will do in my time where I am defending someone is that I'm going to make sure I advocate for them and treat them with love and respect and let them know that if they are headed down a path of destruction or however you want to classify it, is that they have other options, and hopefully with every client that I interact with, I'll be able to go above and beyond what my job duties are to help them. And maybe, they'll be able to remember that, hey, this person cared or whatever the case, just to be a positive impact, you know,
Yeah.
because kids need that. We have a lot of kids that are growing up in bad situations. There are kids that are raising themselves essentially. And if I could just have a good impact on all of my clients, no matter what they're accused of doing, hopefully that will spark something in them that can change their course.
So what I love about the answer that you just gave is that the first part of it was that you wanted to provide love and support to your clients, which is just I just love that, right? That one of the things that I think is often very difficult if you're doing the kind of work that you're talking about, Destiny, is that you do get close to people and you do want to be somebody who's a positive influence in their lives, but you're also playing this professional role with them as well. And it sounds to me like this is another space where, it might be a little different from what people, when they watch TV, are thinking about what lawyers do. But part of being a lawyer isn't necessarily just being the person who stands up for somebody in court. It's all these different things that you're doing for folks outside of the courtroom as well. So I wanted to continue to talk about some of the criminal justice issues, Destiny, just because that's so much of the moment that we're in right now. And one of the things that's been really interesting to watch is, I was going to say it's a wave, but I feel like it's not. It's smaller than a wave. It's maybe a tiny wave, which is people who are progressive prosecutors. So obviously here in South Jersey, we can look just across the river into Philadelphia and see what, Larry Kasner's been doing over there. And we see some progressive prosecutors in other parts of the country as well. What role do you think prosecutors can and should play, whether it's, the top cop, it's the AG or the DA, or whether it's just regular line prosecutors? How are they, or how should they be involved in reform of our criminal justice system? What's your feeling?
Well, I think the most obvious would be just to stay sensitive. I think that it would just involve them staying true to those goals. So considering the entire case, considering the systematic oppression of people of color, not just thinking of like, because if a prosecutor is meant to pursue justice, that means a lot of things, that doesn't just mean a conviction.
Right.
So really, I think just working collaboratively with defense attorneys to really see what happened and what is the correct remedy for this crime, like the correct punishment or whatever.
Yeah. So Tue, I don't want to leave you out in the cold. I don't know if you want to comment also on some of these criminal justice issues and that the moment that we're in, or if there are other current issues that we are dealing with as a nation that you have thoughts about that we should talk about.
I could talk all day, but I'm gonna try to funnel. With criminal justice reform, it's interesting about bringing up progressive prosecution and whatnot. And then Philly, touts one of the more progressive prosecutors in the nation, and Larry Krasner. And yet, there's still ways where we like I think Krasner could be even more progressive, right? And just like constantly putting pressure on our prosecutors and our prosecutor offices to hold themselves accountable and as Destiney said, like keep that end goal in sight. And I think just particularly with Krasner, good first step, but love to see more. Yes, I don't want the narrative to be like like we've made it in Philadelphia because there's still so much more work to do. But in terms of the other topics that it's really on my mind, like homelessness and housing is something that I've been on my mind all summer and really for the past couple of years because I see such a direct connection with education reform or student academics being impacted by housing, and then with like homelessness, like this is a problem across the whole country. This summer I got married one, and I might have done a cross country road trip visiting multiple cities, which might not have been the most COVID safe, but luckily my partner and I we did not get sick. But every city I went to, you see homelessness, and I wonder because of COVID and everyone being remote working at home now, like it's just homelessness is just so much more like, observable than before, and I really think we need to, as a country, analyze like how we've made like a system of tendency based on capitalism that like really like harms the whole population, especially like the lower like income folks, and just puts them in a position where they can't accrue capital, can't accrue money. They're constantly as like treading over water, and like how the littlest like life instance can throw them into homelessness. And we've seen this since the 1950s, why like certain populations, and I'm talking about like legal, like governmental led policies that led to this condition, or like whole populations can't accrue capital, and just like that's part of the systematic injustice that has led to the academic inequalities today. So I
Yeah.
feel like there could be a more like focused conversation on like how housing and the market economy around housing impacts that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was really striking how one of the many things that COVID did was more deeply expose and probably exacerbate in some ways these divisions that we know already exist, in this country. People who are right on the edge of being homeless, who get pushed into homelessness because, as you say, Tway, a bad car accident or, something like that. But, we saw so much of that going on. We're talking now about the rent crisis that we're hitting, and people who are going to lose their homes because they can't pay their rent, because they lost their jobs because of COVID. There's just so much going on in the world. There's so many things that are challenging. So I want to end us on hopefully a note that feels hopeful and happy. So I want to ask both of you, you're going to earn your law degrees. It's right around the corner. So if I could come back and talk to both of you, 10, let's say 15 years from now, so you've had some time to really dig in to your career, where do you hope you are and where do you hope our country is 15 years from now? Destiney?
I hope our country is in a place where we have achieved more racial equality. I hope we're in a place where no one is hungry or no one is living on the street, where people can go outside and not be afraid of violence, whether it's from the police or anyone else. For me personally, I pray and I hope that I am in a place where I'm happy with my career, where I feel like I'm helping people and I feel fulfilled within myself. And yeah, that's all I can ask, is just to be happy and at peace.
I love that. I will ask that for you as well. Tue, what about you? 15 years from now, where do you hope our world is, and where do you hope you'll be?
Yeah, I echo everything Destiny says. I have additional specifics that I could share.
Sure.
So, like, after law school, I have this vision somewhere down the line of like having my own firm or business that provides direct services through community schools and collecting data through those services to see if that improves like student academics. And my prediction is that it will. And however I like track that and then like duplicate that in as many neighborhood schools as possible. So I'm still hoping to like chip away at that achievement gap in education. Yeah. I hope that with the country, like we just continue this trend of like questioning propaganda and like having nuanced conversations, having difficult conversations. I hope difficult conversations become the norm somehow. I hope we continue to pull each other in, even if that means like pushing back a little bit, so then ultimately people get pulled in. I hope you'll stay hopeful, even though it's easy to like. Maybe I'm talking about myself. I hope I stay hopeful so I can so I don't burn out and to stay in the work and whatnot. Yeah, and I hope we're still at it.
Great. Well, I will send good vibes out into the universe for you, that you land where you want to land. So thank both of you for giving me so much of your time today. It was really terrific to talk to you. I'm really excited about the work that you're doing while you're in law school, and can't wait to see the work that you do once you graduate and have that law degree under your belt. You folks are the ones who are going to change the world. So I'm glad to have any role in helping you make that happen. So thanks very much. And that's the end of our session today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Power of Attorney is produced by Rutgers Law School. With 2 locations, minutes from Philadelphia and New York City, Rutgers Law offers the prestige and reputation of a large, nationally known university with a personal, small campus experience. Learn more by visiting law.rutgers.edu.